Hello, my name is Nick Norby, and I'm the host of History Up in Smoke, cigar chat of classical icons, where I discuss individuals from all epochs of time. In this installment, I'm going to be talking about Lucius Domitius Aenobarbus. You might know him better by his adopted name, Nero, who was one of the most pernicious of the Claudian dynasty emperors. But before we talk about Nero, let's go grab a cigar. Well, I'm going to be smoking the H. Upman Magnum 46 this evening. I must correct myself. It's the Cuban H. Upman Magnum 46, and there is a difference with that. I've never actually smoked one of these before, and it looks like a very nice, well-constructed cigar. Looks to be a triple cap on it. And it has a good amount of veins on it. I don't know if the camera can really catch that, but there's a lot of veins in this, and doesn't actually smell like a whole lot. If you had to push me against a wall and make me decide, I'd say it smells kind of like a barnyard. But that's actually not that uncharacteristic for a lot of cigars to actually smell like that, the aroma that they give off. But just a little bit of background about this cigar. This is, as I said, a Cuban cigar, but it was actually first introduced by a German banker named Hermann Upman. And obviously he lived in Germany, but he loved Cuban cigars so much that he ended up moving to Cuba, opening a bank there, and he started to create his own cigars. And this was in about 1844, so this is one of the older Cuban brands, and I might add that it is a very, very popular cigar. But even after his death, obviously the cigar lives on, and it's embossed with his name. And it just, from what I've heard, it's an absolutely wonderful cigar. Now, the 46 on there, you might be wondering what that represents. It's the circumference of the cigar. It is a 46 ring gauge. It's not too bulky of a cigar. It's actually a Toro. The smell, I'm liking it now, a little bit. I was catching a little bit of that aroma. But just a little bit about Cuban cigars. Obviously, you can't sell them here. So if you want one of these, you're gonna have to travel abroad or purchase them online, and that's because of the embargo that was put in place against the Cuban government back in 1962 from President John F. Kennedy. The funny thing was, President Kennedy was a cigar fanatic, and he loved Cuban cigars, particularly this brand, H. Upman. So what he did is, before he signed the embargo against Cuba, barring all trade from Cuba to the United States of America, he sent Pierre Salinger, his press secretary, to get him some H. Upman cigars. He said he wanted 1,000 of them. And it was relatively short notice, and Salinger was like, oh, I don't know if I can get these. Well, he ended up getting 1,200 of them. And a few days later, President Kennedy calls Salinger to his office, and he says, Mr. Salinger, how did we do? And he says, I got you 1,200 of them. And President Kennedy smiled, opened his drawer in his office, took out a long sheet of paper, signed it. It was the embargo against Cuba. So he got his cigars, signed the embargo. Now it was no longer illegal contraband for him to have these cigars. But it looks like a wonderful cigar, and like I said, you can't buy Cubans here. If you do, it's a big mistake, because 90% of the Cubans that are sold here in the United States, particularly the big brands, Monte Cristo, Cohiba, they're fake. 9 out of 10 of them, maybe even more than that, are fake. And even if someone gives you one and you don't know where it came from, or you buy some by mistake, or you have some and you haven't smoked them, I wouldn't smoke them if I were you, because you don't know what's in those. I've seen videos of people cutting open fake Cuban cigars and finding sawdust and all sorts of weird stuff in them. So make sure you're getting the real deal. Now, in my last installment, or actually it was a couple installments prior to this, I talked about lighting the cigar. In this installment, I want to talk about the different methods of cutting your cigar. Now there's three primary ways to do it. The first one, I'm gonna grab it here, it's known as the guillotine cut. And quite simply, you take the guillotine and you insert it into the cigar like so, and you nip off just enough of it so that you're able to get a good draw from the cigar. Now you have to be cautious with these because the cigar, the way it's wrapped with the wrapper, it ends towards the shoulder and they put a cap over that. Well, if you cut too far into the cap, you'll unravel the cigar and you will not be enjoying it, I promise you that. So they do make a foolproof way by putting a metal shield in the back of some of them. But the problem with that is it really prevents you from cutting more than you want. So if you don't have a good draw and you want to take off just a little bit more, if you've got that metal plate back there, it's not going to allow you to do that. So that's just a word of caution. Another way to do that is with a V-cut. Now, I'm not a big advocate of the V-cut. It just cuts a notch essentially into the cigar. It's a safe way to cut your cigar. Some people will even make a cross with it using that. And the third and final way would be a punch. And on the back of my lighter, if I can get this open, I have a little punch on it. You can probably see the side of it there. And you just take it and you gently press it into the back of the cigar and it makes a little opening. Now they make different gauges for these, but I'm not a fan of these either. And the reason being is it really limits the draw that you can get from the cigar. Like I said, the least safe way to cut your cigars with a guillotine, you just need to be careful and cut off the right amount and you'll be just fine and you'll get a very pleasant draw from them every time. So let's cut this and we'll get it lit up. Give it just a second here, take off just a little bit. I always like to give it a little blow, just get any loose tobacco off. Now, there are a few websites, maybe you're wondering, where you can get Cuban cigars legally shipped to you in the United States. There's two sites that I use. I use Montfortuna. They're based out of Switzerland, very reputable company. And I also use finestcubancigars.com. I'm sure there's some other good websites, but if you do a little bit of research, you know, you can definitely find reputable companies that sell Cuban cigars at fair prices. But I think I got this one when we were in Rome. And oh man, it brings back memories. I've been there multiple times. If you've never been to Rome, put it on your bucket list of a place to go because it's a very ancient city. It's been there for thousands of years, and it's just the beauty of the history there is absolutely wonderful. And, you know, speaking of the history aspect of it, several millennia ago, a couple thousand years ago, Rome ruled the world. They were the most powerful nation in the entire known world at the time. And they were governed by emperors. Some of them were good and some of them were not so good. I'll just keep talking while I light here. And one of the really good emperors was Augustus. He was actually one of the first emperors, and he sort of set the standard for the other emperors that would follow him. But some of the other emperors were not good. Coming to mind, Caligula, not a very good emperor. And some of them were really bad. And very snug draw. Very snug draw on this. Nero was among the worst. And we're going to spend a little time talking about Nero in this installment, but I want to get into this cigar a little bit, enjoy it, and then we'll talk a little bit about Nero. So, oh, that's very good. Let me have a few puffs of this, see if I can get this to draw a little bit better, and when I come back, we're going to talk about Nero. All right, well, I'm coming into the first third of the cigar, and I told you previously I was having a little bit of a problem with the draw. I managed to kind of work it around a little bit, and the draw did loosen up and get a little bit better. As far as strength-wise, I would classify this as a medium body cigar, but I'm not really impressed with it right now, to be honest with you. flavors are not popping out at me, and that could be because I have an empty stomach, I haven't ate anything, and that, believe it or not, that can make a big difference on the outcome of the flavor and taste of the tobacco when you consume it. But there is a little bit of a graham cracker type flavor to it, which I do enjoy. But even the smoke aroma that it's getting off, it's not blowing my socks off by any means. So good smoke output though. Anyways, we were talking about Nero. And my goodness, that guy was a paradoxical figure. Early on in his rule and reign, he was loved by many people. He did a lot of good. Later on, he was despised by others. People absolutely could not stand the guy. And like most people that come into power, they're not able to harness that power to do good with it. I mean, greed, everything, all these things start to worm their way into people's lives. And like I said, very, very few people can handle the kind of power that Nero had. But before we talk about Nero, we need to contextualize this a little bit. Because there's a lot of moving parts that are going on. Before Nero was emperor, Claudius was the emperor of Rome. And Claudius overall did a pretty good job for Rome. I would classify him as a good emperor for what he did, but his third wife, Messalina, did not think so. In fact, she secretly divorced him and staged a coup to try and overthrow Claudius as the emperor. Of course, that failed. She was guilty of sedition, and she was actually murdered. Well, not murdered, I would say executed, because it was done legally, supposedly. But they had a couple children. They had 2 children, actually. They had a boy by the name of Britannicus, and you see Britain in that name. He got that name because Claudius was responsible for capturing the island of Britain during the time, and the Roman Empire was the largest it had been to date during that. And he also had a beautiful daughter by the name of Octavia. And after the death of Messalina, Agrippina the Younger comes in. And she is an individual that is going to be lingering in the shadows for the rest of our narrative. And she'll come out in full form as well. But she was in exile because she had tried to have her brother Caligula, who was the emperor before Claudius, killed. And she failed, and her brother exiled her to an island. So she gets back to Rome, and Agrippina is a very powerful woman, I might add. She has Claudian bloodlines in her veins. Her father was Germanicus, one of the greatest generals in the Roman Empire ever. And her great-great-grandfather was none other than Augustus himself. But this was a sly, sinister woman who was very crafty, and she sought power more than anything. She was a woman, so she couldn't be emperor, but she would do everything in her power to become that emperor, or at least call the shots. And she would do it by any means necessary. In fact, she would use Claudius to achieve her objective, namely to get Nero into power, her son. But the problem was Claudius didn't want to remarry. Claudius had 0 aspirations to remarry. But Agrippina actually convinced him to marry her. This is where it gets really strange. Claudius is her uncle. This is an incestuous relationship that's about to take place. It was forbidden back then as well, and the people completely uproared and couldn't stand the idea. Eventually, though, the Roman Senate passed it, and the 2 were allowed to marry. And after they married, Agrippina became the most powerful woman in Roman history. In fact, she was designated the name Augusta. That was reserved for deities or women that had a lot of power after they died. She was given this name while she was still alive. Not digging this cigar right now. Not digging it at all. We'll continue, maybe it'll get better. But after Claudius and Agrippina were married, she had a son. Agrippina had a son. His name was Lucius Domitius Anabarbus. and she wanted Claudius to adopt her son. Well, he did, and he named him Nero. He had great aspirations for Nero because technically, Nero was older than Britannicus, so he would have been next in line for the throne. Pretty powerful. But Agrippina, she's just moving the chess pieces all over the board right away. Like I said, this lady, she has a plan and she's going to execute it. So Claudius has his daughter ready to marry Nero. So Octavia and Nero are going to marry, and the bloodlines, everything's going to be there. The Claudian dynasty is going to continue. And at this time, Agrippina hires Aeneas Seneca, the great Stoic philosopher, to tutor Nero, to teach him things. And she does that, and Nero starts growing and blossoming into a wonderful young man. But somewhere along the line, as a few years pass by, Agrippina's plan for Nero to rule starts to deteriorate. Claudius watches Britannicus grow into a pretty nice young man, somebody that could possibly rule as emperor. And this just throws Agrippina into a fit of rage, because nothing is going to stop her from getting her son into power so she can be a puppet in the background. Or he would actually be a puppet, and she would be controlling things. Man, I'm having to take double puffs just to get a nice draw. Anyways, this is where things get weird. Like I said, Agrippina would stop at nothing to get power, even if it meant killing her husband, uncle. She would do it if necessary. And it got to a point where she was going to have Claudius secretly killed. So she goes to this old hag witch woman who concocted all sorts of poisons. Her name was Locusta. And her and Locusta start to throw questions back and forth regarding the means or how they were going to secretly poison and kill Claudius. And after quite a bit of discussion, they come to the determination that they're going to poison him. And they're going to do it by infusing his favorite dish, mushrooms, with some of this poison. But they had to be very cautious when they did this, because Agrippina knew that if the poison was too strong and it killed him instantly, people would know that he was poisoned and she would be in a lot of trouble. But if it was too weak and he sort of suffered but was conscious, well, he could appoint Britannicus instead of Nero to be the emperor. So they needed to tread very delicately as they did this. Man, I'm having problems with this thing. Even the combustion is bad on it. That's very unfortunate. Anyways, so I think it was around October 12th of 54 AD. Claudius is probably around 60 years old. And while they're eating dinner, he has some of the mushrooms, and suddenly he becomes very ill. I mean, it's pretty rapid. And he's starting to move in and out of consciousness. And everybody is wondering what's going on, so they take him out, bring him to his palace bedroom, and his pulse is really starting to get low. They think that he is about to die. Suddenly around midnight, the guy comes to. He sits up out of his bed, he starts looking around, and he gets up and he's walking around. Agrippina is like, what is going on? How is this guy doing this? Why did the poison not kill him? Man, this is bad. Let me relight this quick. It's even tunneling a little bit, where it starts to burn deep inside and it doesn't burn evenly at all. Let's see if I can really get her lit up here. That was a nice draw. That's much better. But anyways, Claudius sits up. He starts walking around. They're like, what is going on? Agrippina calls Xenophon, the Greek doctor, and she's like, why is he not dead? Xenophon says he threw it all up. Agrippina's like, we need to finish him off, we need to finish him off now. They can't, choke him out with a pillar or something. He's got enough strength, he could fight him off. So Xenophon says, I'm going to dip a feather that they use to make people vomit with in the poison. And I'm going to put enough of it on there so when it touches the back of his throat and I tickle it, he's going to die. And this was very common when someone was sick. So Xenophon tells Claudius, I'm going to tickle the back of your throat with this, and we're going to try and expel anything else that might be in there. Claudius says, fine. Puts it on the back of his throat, wiggles it around. Within almost seconds, Claudius is dead. The emperor is gone. Nero immediately seizes power. It is incredible how fast he gets power, and he is the new emperor of Rome. I think he was about 17 years old, but he was very young. But, like I said, he was tutored under the great Seneca. In Gaius Tranquillus Suetonius, a 2nd century Roman historian, tells us that Nero's first 5 years of rulership were the greatest in Roman history. They were really good. But Agrippina, like I said, is calling the shots behind the scenes. She starts to get her names on the coins, her picture on the coins along with Nero's. Women were not allowed in Senate meetings, but here's Agrippina behind a curtain listening to everything that's going on. Now think about this for a second. If your mom is bossing you around and you're the most powerful person in the world now, at some point you might acquiesce to her wishes for a while, but eventually you're going to start saying, no, Mom, I'm going to do what I want to do. Nero does. Agrippina doesn't like that. She wanted as much power as humanly possible, and it started to get pretty bad. And one historian actually wrote a little bit later, he said that she gave her son the kingdom, but couldn't tolerate the fact that he was ruler. And this just burned Agrippina up, that Nero was failing to listen to her now. And this is where we start to get a full-blown crisis, because Nero at this point doesn't really love Octavia, who he was forced to marry. He actually falls in love with a freed woman who was formerly a slave from Asia Minor, and he stops taking advice from Seneca as well. This is sort of the demise, the beginning of the demise of Nero, if you will. And he starts running around at night on the streets. He puts a wig on, a hood up, and him and his friends are running around beating people up. They don't know it's the emperor because he's the way he's dressed. And Agrippina at this point threatens the emperor. Not something you want to do. We're going to talk about that after I get through a little bit more of this, and I'm really hoping the flavor picks up. So sit tight.